I think it's this quest to really figure out that matrix where, like, where does it all converge? What's the real deal about me? What am I really here to do? The clarity follows action. You got to get messy.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. Cathy Heller is on the show today. I recently met Cathy after being on her podcast as a guest. Her podcast is called Don't Keep Your Day Job. And I got to know her. I really love her spirit, and I learned more about her journey. And I asked her to come on this podcast as well. So Cathy has a very unique way of navigating her career and what she loves. She is a yes and type of person. And what she's done is she's added layers to her career and her livelihood over the course of time, adding things that she loves to do. So rather than just switching gears and completely changing paths, she's actually just added certain things and been able to have kind of a portfolio of different things that she loves to do, some of which are completely unrelated for the most part. So she's a musician and has been a musician for a very long time. And she decided at one point to start licensing her own music, became successful in doing that. And then she decided to start teaching other people how to do what she was doing. She created an online course. Eventually, later on, she becomes a podcast host. She's a mother. She leads a very full life. And one of the things that it really allows us to understand is that you don't have to choose just one career focus or just one thing necessarily anymore. You can have a variety and you can have these different layers, which is pretty cool because it's like a way to diversify your skills and your passion and your interest. When you hear from Cathy, you will notice, as I have, that she has such a zest for life. And she has a lot of valuable advice when it comes to identifying what you are assigned to do in this lifetime, what you're here for, how to find that thing or that set of things. We tackle the most taboo topics on the Why Not Now show. Oftentimes, you're hearing guests share things they've never shared before. In the spirit of things we don't typically talk about, you should know that the Why Not Now show is supported by Poo-Pourri, the original before-you-go toilet spray. It's magic. My friends at Poo-Pourri have literally taken the smell out of you-know-what. This pure blend of essential oils stops bathroom odor before it begins. Visit poopourri.com, and Why Not Now listeners get 20% off with code WHYNOTNOW. That's all one word. And you can hear the story about Poo-Pourri in our interview with founder Susie Batiste. That's Why Not Now, episode 28. Poo-Pourri is also available at Bed Bath & Beyond. Cathy, welcome to the Why Not Now show. How are you doing today?
I'm so great because I get to talk to you, and you're the best. I admire you, and you're so genuine. And people love you, and I'm one of those people, so it's so fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course. And it's fun because now the tables have turned. I've been on your show and you're so lovely to connect with, and your audience is amazing. And now we get to swap seats. So I'm excited to dive in and talk about you. Let's start in the spirit of why not now. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you had to ask yourself, why not now?
Yeah. There's been so many of those, but one of them that comes to mind was almost 2 years ago. I had just had my third daughter, and she's now almost 2. She was like 10 days old. And I remember I got an email from a friend of mine, and she said, "Hey, Kath, did you ever think about starting a podcast? Because if you did, my husband just had dinner with an old friend, and she was saying that she sells advertising for podcasts, and she was saying that she's been looking for talent, and she's been looking for someone to sit with and mentor. And she said, would you like to have a meeting with her?" Everything in my body was like so excited. I was like, I have wanted to start a podcast. And I look over at my 10-day-old baby, and I look in the mirror, and I'm like, still 20 pounds overweight, just had the baby, and feeling really tired because I'm waking up to feed her every hour. I thought, wow, this isn't the right time. It's too bad. Like, it's just not the right moment because this is where my life is. And then I had this other thought come to my mind, and it said, but why not? Why not right now? So what? So you're busy. So you're tired. Why not? Why not do it now? Like, is that really a good reason not to do it? And so I just typed back in the email and I said, you know what? I'd love to meet her. And I figured, what's the worst thing that can happen? I'll have a meeting. We'll see what comes from that. I took this meeting, and she's now the woman who sells advertising for my show. And she's been doing that for 2 years. And she said, I heard you're really inspiring. Amy said she's heard you speak a bunch of times. And I said, but, I don't have, 500,000 followers on social media. I'm just a person. I'm just a girl who came out here with a dream, who made a living as a songwriter. And I've been doing a bunch of speaking, but I don't know. And she said, well, do you feel so passionate about what it is that you would want to have a show about? And I said, yeah, that part, I really feel like I have. Like, I feel so passionate about helping people do what they really want to do and find purpose in their life. And she said, so I think that might be enough. And she said, but it's really, really competitive. It's a really difficult space to break through. She said, look, I'm going to help you record the first few episodes. And she said, if you can get to 1,000 listeners within 6 months, then we'll hang out with you for 6 months. And I had all these fears, all these like really quote unquote rational thoughts, like, why would you do this? There's already hundreds and hundreds of people who have podcasts. Why on earth are you going to be able to break into this market with people like Ira Glass and Amy Jo Martin and everybody else, And I thought, well, just why not? Why not now? Let's just do it. And it worked out. It worked out. The show is, we started recording a little before we actually aired, but we didn't start airing until January of 2017. That's when our first episode came out. And that's only a year and a half ago. And we have about 3 million downloads to our show. Pretty cool, So, yeah, I hope that people hear that and say, why not? What's the worst that's going to happen if I just go ahead and do this thing?
I love that the timing, right? So here you have your 10-day-old daughter, your third child, new to the world, and life serves you up this opportunity. And that look at yourself in the mirror moment where you say, why not? I think what's so cool is that when we actually answer that question, it brings so much logic into place, right? Because you actually have to answer it, and you find yourself making up your own excuses. So it's like
Absolutely.
You're catching yourself. It's like, oh, I caught you. So what a powerful lesson in that process that you went through of, no, actually answer the question. Why not? Tell me, write it down. And it's these things that live in our heads that aren't quite as tangible or specific that just keep us from thinking about it further. But, well, so I have so many follow-up questions. Can you give a little context of the pre-podcast life. So you're a musician, also an entrepreneur that, from what I understand, kind of pivoted into licensing to help other musicians.
Right.
Did that stop and end, or is that in tandem, or how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I just continued to do what I was doing, and I just keep like sort of yes-anding things to my life. So I just have like one thing going, and as long as that's going well, I just add another thing. And then as long as that's going well, I sort of add another team member. So I have, 7 people who help me and work for me and have different roles. So it allows me to keep different areas of my business alive. But yeah, I mean, essentially, I came to LA 15 years ago, and I was looking to be a star. I'm going to be a star, kid. I'm put your name in pictures. I grew up wanting to be a songwriter. And I think a lot of people, they don't know that there are so many things in between sort of where they are and Beyonce, whatever your career path, like whether you want to be in sports or you want to be a potter or you want to be a designer, like there are so many ways for you to figure out how to have a fulfilling life. And you don't have to be Steve Jobs. You can be a person who finds a way to do the thing you love. But I didn't know that. So the only thing I knew about songwriting was I should be a songwriter that tours the world and get a record deal. So I came out to LA knowing no one, and I was really determined. I was really determined to do this with my life. Growing up, my parents had like a really, really tough marriage. They eventually got divorced, and my mom struggled with a lot of depression, like serious depression. She was suicidal for my entire high school career. And my dad was really nowhere to be found. And so I remember thinking, like, laying in bed, looking up at the ceiling during those really tough times. I was like, if I'm going to be on the planet, I got to do something that makes me feel really alive. Like, as long as I'm going to be here, I just want to feel like I'm doing something that's purposeful. I was, studying this person who was depressed. And every day, I was sort of asking this question, like, what makes a person feel this way, where the bottom like drops out from under you? And I felt like it was losing a sense of purpose. I feel like when people feel called to do something and excited about putting something inside of themselves out into the world, we feel excited and alive. And I think when we lose that sense of purpose, like, what am I here for? I think that that's what really leads to feeling sad. So I think the opposite of depression is not necessarily happy. I think it's called feeling purpose and feeling that feeling. So I was like, I love writing music, and I feel like I could write things that could inspire people and uplift people. And that was really my role growing up in my house, was to be the one who was like the peacemaker and the problem solver. And I loved music, and music was how I got through everything. So I came out to LA really determined. And I remember having listened to those Tony Robbins cassette tapes in my Volvo, my car. And he would just say things like, it's all about ask the right question, And so I remember like getting out a legal pad, and I'd be like, all right, so what's the question? The question is, I want to get a record deal. Okay, so what would I need? Well, I would need some music. Well, what kind of music would I need? Well, who would help me create it? Well, where would I get that producer's name? Well, where should I look for that? I would just ask question after question until I got to the bottom of the legal pad, and I knew exactly what the very next step was I needed to do, which was like, so call this person because she will give you the number of so-and-so, and then you will create that song, and then you'll get that song to this person who will then see if it's good enough for this label. Like, everything has to do with just ask the right question, because your brain is this incredible processor. So if you give yourself just like a problem, it's going to say like, yeah, here's all the reasons why that problem is true. It's going to bring you like proof, like, yeah, that's the way it is. If you say things like nothing works out for me, or this is impossible, your brain's going to say, of course it's impossible. You're right. It's impossible because you don't know anybody in that city. You don't have a job in that city. You don't have any contacts. You don't have money, right? But if you say to yourself a question instead, like, well, how could I make this work? Your brain's going to be creative and start like throwing out to you solutions. And so I just continued to kind of navigate life that way until, I got a day job. I, had an office job while I had an apartment with my roommate. And after work and on the weekends, I was recording music. And eventually I did get a record deal, and I was signed to Interscope. And I remember actually sitting in the room when Lady Gaga was recording Paparazzi. I was there at Sunset Sounds like for that session. And Ron Fair, who was my producer at the time, turned to me and he said, Cathy, when I came to LA myself, I wanted to be a songwriter. And I sat down with Bill Conti, who's the award-winning composer who wrote the music for Rocky and a million other things. And I showed him my music, and I had him listen, and I said, what do you think? And he said to me, Ron, you're a really good songwriter, but you're an amazing producer. And he looked at me and he said, he said, there's something in you. He said, you're a good songwriter and you got this deal and you're here. He said, but there's something in you. He's like, I just feel like when you talk to people, you have a gift. And I looked at him like, you're crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Like, are you saying like, I'm not cut out to be a songwriter? And he said, and I'm not saying it as an insult. I'm telling you, you're going to be led to where you're really supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I just think there's a quality that you have. It's not like all these other girls that come in here and get these record deals and have to wear the clothes they have to wear and give their whole life to touring around the world. And I was like, he's nuts, Anyway, about 6 months later, Jimmy Iovine called me. I was driving on the highway and he's like, Kath, we're going to drop you from the deal because your music is so sweet. We're not sure how we're going to market it. Like, I just don't know if this is it. And I was crying. I was like, oh God, I'm not going to, I had it in my hands, like right there. It was like meeting the Wizard of Oz and then he can't get you home. I was like, what am I going to do? So I had a series of like jobs, I was like, well, maybe I'm not cut out to do music. So I have to go be realistic. So I'm going to do something else. And so I worked at a nonprofit and then I taught preschool and then I worked in floral design because I was like, well, maybe that would be creative. And it's like, it was, but it wasn't for me. And then I took a class at UCLA in mindfulness and I was like working with children. And one day, 2 years later, I'm driving in my car and I'm crying. And I'm like, I have to pull over. I can't see. Like the sunblock is in my eyes. I'm crying. I was like, Kath, you got to figure out what you're really meant to do. And it's so frustrating when you don't know the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. And you're like, I just wish someone could like point me in the path. Right. So I said, well, I'm going to go back towards music. And is there again, now asking a question, is there any other way I can make a living in music without having a record deal? Like, is there any other way? And so I started to ask the question and somebody said to me, you could license your songs, all those amazing songs that you wrote that you now own and have. Why don't you license them? Why don't you reach out to someone at Fox or ABC or people who work on Grey's Anatomy and see if they can use those songs because they're professionally recorded and now you still have the rights to them. Use them. I was like, is that a thing? So I had all this music, and so I just started to ask the next question. Well, who would I reach out to? Well, where do they work? Well, what kind of format do they need the file sent? I would just ask the questions. I started sending in emails and I was really personable over email and people started to respond. Next thing I knew, within that first year, I started licensing my songs to all these big TV shows, trailers. Then I started writing more music. I was able to quit my job, do music full time. And then I was making like $300,000 a year just with my songs in like all these TV shows and then ads for like Walmart and Kellogg's and McDonald's. I did like several McDonald's ads and they would use my song. It wasn't a jingle. They would take my song and they would like use 30 seconds of the middle of the song. It was amazing. So I thought, this is it. Until that purpose question kicked in again. I was like, but I want to really do something even more. And I want to grow and I want to keep growing. And so I started to be featured in magazines. Like full page stories were written about me in Billboard and Variety and the LA Weekly. And I was on the cover of the USA Today music section. And I started to get emails from other artists who said, this is amazing. Like you're pitching yourself. You're finding these people on your own. You're making all this money on your own without a record label behind you. Can you help me? And so I said, no. Like I have an ego and it tells me that this is my identity. I'm not also a business person. We always do that. Mm-hmm. And so I said, you know what? Let me help you. Why not? It took me like a year to finally get that the universe was like knocking so loud saying, I think you have another thing you can do, which is help other artists. And I was like, okay. And I was so nervous that if I helped other artists, that somehow my own art, like I wouldn't be seen in the eyes of all these people as a real musician anymore. Because now I wore a different hat. But instead, my career as my own artistry, it only grew as I then opened an agency to help other artists. And then I started to help these incredible, sweet, well-intentioned artists who were really feeling stuck. I started to help them write music that would solve problems, right? As opposed to just, writing songs. Like I would help them understand, like, listen, look at what this, the stories that are being told on these shows and whatever. And they started to learn like, oh, I can like use my craft to like write something that would be, a universal storyline that would have, oh, okay, cool. And they started to make some money. And then I decided to start teaching some online classes to help artists because there were so many people writing to me who didn't live nearby. And so I started an online class helping artists like learn how to write music for film and TV. And then that kind of grew. And between the agency and the course and then my own writing, I was now making like 7 figures. And I was like, what's happened? This is crazy, you know? And I was just like me, like doing my thing, you know, just every day, like where else could I serve? What else could I do? And it was just like, it's amazing how this multi-hyphenate life really is such a ticket to expanding and growing and being successful. Is like just asking the next question, what else could I do? How else could I serve? As opposed to being afraid, you know, to like, I'm only one thing. And then it leads us to where we are at the beginning of this episode, because then after those classes and after the speaking and after the licensing agency and my own music was sort of doing its thing, one of the women who had heard me speak said, hey, everything is starting a podcast. And then I just said, well, let's try that. And then that sort of grew. And then I got a book deal, but I'm still doing all those other things. And I have 3 kids and it's a lot. There's a lot going on, but I'm also super grateful to get to do any of these things. So that's the whole story.
There are so many amazing takeaways from this story. And it all actually wraps up into a nice like package. But I just want to point out a few things that you said because it really struck home. If you ever listen to Oprah's Super Soul podcast, she'll say, oh, tweetable moment. Well, I had so many of those moments just now, but I keep a yes anding to my life. You said I keep a yes anding to my life.
Yeah.
And another one was, just asking the right questions. So one of the things that I'm hearing you say, if we get more tactical about it, is so you were in this zone, right, with music, and you're a performer, you're a musician, you're a songwriter. And what I think is cool about what's happened with your journey is you still were in the right zone, but it was like just shifting, maybe even a 5-degree shift changes our entire trajectory. So here you were in the right zone, per se. You just needed to tweak a little to get to that, next place. So yeah. I think for people listening, if you're doing something and you know that it's maybe something you love, but it's not exactly working, you're not getting the results that maybe you really want and you've tried, and maybe just starting to shift your lens 5 degrees. How else could this be looked at from a different point of view? And the fact that we have our zone of genius and our zone of excellence, and Dr. Gay Hendricks, who's been on the show, really invented that concept. And it sounds like to me, you have lived in many aspects of your zone of excellence. And you've maybe more recently found your zone of genius, and how the world loves us to be in that zone of excellence because we're good at it and people know it and they say, oh, you should do that. But when you were feeling a lack of purpose a couple of times, even after these 5-degree shifts, 10-degree shifts, pivots, you weren't going to settle. You're like, nope, I need more purpose, even though here comes the money rolling in and that's a nice carrot. But okay, this multi-dimension to your career, let's talk about that for a second, because as you say, I keep yes anding to my life. And it's like you have this, we no longer have to just have one swim lane or one ladder we're climbing. Let's talk about that idea of having almost like a portfolio of revenue streams, businesses, things that you're doing. Because on one hand, I totally subscribe to this philosophy of essentialism and focus. And I get that, and I've experienced it in my life. Yet I also sometimes have a hard time calibrating that with, no. There are so many different things that I am doing, want to do, and can do. Can you talk through a little bit about how you approach this variety of things that you're doing?
And you know what? You are a great example of this, because you started out, working in one particular vein of what you're doing now, but then you went out on your own, and then you became an author, and then a podcast. Like you really continue to just say, like, where else can I serve? How else can I show up? And I mean, you're an example of that as our most successful human beings. But my approach to it is, if you're on the planet you're here for a reason. I went through fertility treatment to have all of my kids. I have 3 kids, and it sounds really simple when I say that. But if you were there in the 7 years that I was trying to have a kid, every single time was excruciating. It was difficult. It was such a mystery. How can we conceive of a person? I went through 15 different rounds, and most of those failed. And then I wound up, thank God, with 3 healthy kids over the course of 7 years and lots of trial and error. And I saw firsthand under the ultrasound every single time I walked into the office how difficult it was to bring a human being into the world. Now, I know that it seems like people get pregnant all the time, but even when somebody gets pregnant and has a child, the odds of you being the one who comes out into this world is 1 in 400 trillion, because there's so many potential sperm, right? That the fact that it becomes you and that you get conceived and it's healthy and the whole pregnancy goes well and you come out, it's incredible. So if you're here, right, it's an incredible testament to the fact that you're supposed to be here. And my daughter, her best friends are twins, and they have different fingerprints. And her mom, I remember her mom saying to me, it's so funny because everything about them is identical, but their fingerprints are not the same. And I said, well, maybe it's because they have a different imprint. They're here to do something different than one another. Mm-hmm. That's why there's 2 of them, because they're not the same. And they have something that they each came to do in this world. So if you're listening, if you're here, you've been assigned. You've been assigned to do something. So if that's true, then we've got to get busy figuring out what is that about? Why am I here, right? So when it comes to multi-hyphen and trying different things and really opening up that portfolio, I think it's this quest to really figure out that matrix where where does it all converge? What's the real deal about me? What am I really here to do? The clarity follows action. You got to get messy. You got to explore. So what most human beings do is when they're a kid, somebody tells them what they're good at. You're good at math. You're not. You're a good dancer. You're hysterical. You're good at telling stories, but you're bad at school. People tell you what you are, first of all, or you sort of see what's modeled and you're like, oh, well, my dad's a veterinarian, so I'm going to be a veterinarian. Then you get to be 18 or 19, and most of us go to school of some kind, and we're like, oh, okay, I'm going to choose this. And then we have a lot of fear around moving away from that because we want certainty. It makes us feel safe. So we try to keep ourselves in this box. And then you read all these studies about how 80% of the world is miserable at their work. And I have a friend who works with people as they sort of transition out of this world. They pass away and go into the next realm. And she said that the number one thing that people say that they regret is that they didn't live life on their terms, because we don't allow ourselves to be messy and dive in and try this thing and then try that thing. And the truth is that I told you my story really quickly because we don't have all the hours in the world. But for everything that I've done that worked out, there were 8 other things I tried that failed miserably. I had wrote a show with an awesome TV writer who worked on Third Rock from the Sun. We had gotten together and we had created this TV show. It was called The Peaceful Place, and it was about kids learning mindfulness, and it was music related to, and we pitched it to every network, and everyone said no. And that was a 2-year process. And I've had many other things, including an engagement that was broken, and now I'm married to somebody else. So there's been many things in my life that didn't work. But the only way to ultimately figure out what are you really here for? Why you? 1 in 400 trillion is you have to be willing to be uncomfortable and start and try. And then what happens is someone like you, Amy, steps up, gets out of your desk, goes to help Shaq tweet something, and years later, you're a motivational speaker helping people to recognize why they are, why they're important and how to connect with other human beings and be authentic and, change the landscape of social media into something that's actually, making people truly happy and using it to really lift everyone, since, let's face it, the whole world is on it. So that's massive.
Right.
But the only reason you got there is because you were brave enough to say, what if I had the faith to just step out over here and I'm feeling like a total imposter, but I'm going to try it. Oh my gosh, this worked. Now I'm going to try this. Oh my gosh, this didn't work as well as this, but this led me over here. So now I'm going to keep going this way. So I feel like ultimately, I just have this quest and I'm still on it. Like I'm still like, where does the Venn diagram come together? And it's like, this is what it's about. Now, every day I kind of feel like I'm getting closer and closer and turning that kaleidoscope more and more. And it's like really coming into view. But it's just amazing how with this podcast, I was just asked to speak at the podcast upfronts in New York City. So I'm going to be there. And Ira Glass is the person who spoke in the time slot that I'm speaking in. He spoke there last year. So I said to my mom, she said, oh my God, like, how do you explain this? And I'm like, I think because when you do the thing you're supposed to do, the door opens, right? But it's like, you've got to be willing to try a bunch of doors. And that's a whole other conversation about how we stay safe and keep ourselves small. And there's so much to talk about there, but that's what's really in the way.
You're exactly right. And this concept of, it's not even a concept, it's a reality. You have an assignment. And so many of us, our listeners, are like, okay, but I just don't know what my assignment is. And that journey of following the morsels, literally, of you just got to get started. Don't even overthink it. Stop worrying about it. Figure out, what does light you up that you're interested in. Bring some purpose, and it may not be it, but you got to start there because there will be a morsel that leads you into the next right step. And getting out of our own way and just get started is such a big thing.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. If you are digging this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. It just takes a moment and it means a ton to us. Also, after recording more than 100 episodes, I've created a bit of a cheat sheet on the top 5 things I've learned from renegades and how they get from idea to action, from dreaming to doing. I will email you the downloadable PDF when you subscribe to my newsletter. Just head to amyjomartin.com and click on Connect with Me. I was reading up and watching videos of you and stuff, Cathy, before we hopped on, of course, and I got the biggest kick out of you telling the story of when you started your podcast and how you recorded it 8 times, the same podcast in your closet. I mean, let's just get real. That's how shit starts. You have to just get your hands dirty and dive in, right? We can think about it all day, but I've been there. It's a process, and now where you are, it's really cool to hear those stories because otherwise it can sometimes sound like a glamour journey,
Oh, I can't stand it. I mean, I go on Instagram all the time. Like yesterday I was on and I was like, hey guys, here I am in my kitchen. And like, I show them one part of my kitchen. It's like stunning. I'm so grateful we live in this like beautiful house. And then I pan the camera over here and I'm like, and now look over here. There's a sheet on my couch because I have my 2-year-old and my 6-year-old home and they're painting nail polish. And the Peppa Pig cereal bowl is on the floor with spilled raspberries next to it, smashed on the ground. And the eggs are still sitting on the burner, the burner's off, but I haven't cleaned up the butter and the milk. It's been there for an hour. And I'm like, and I don't know when the last time was that I had sex consistently with my husband. It's like, oh, are you free next Tuesday for 30 minutes? And then we don't see each other for 3 weeks. And I'm like, why are we yelling at each other? Oh, because we never talk. We don't have a perfect marriage. I hate it. I hate when people have this, it's all just dialed in. We're great. We had the best salad today and the best vacation. We read the best books. We look great. Our kids are great. Please stop. This is not what's happening. No one is experiencing that life. So please don't take 1 second of your time feeling jealous of that person because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
I know. It's so fascinating to watch social media over the last decade and see kind of where things are right now in some ways and places. And sometimes I would just say to my husband, we jumped the shark a while back, this whole social media thing. And I think what's happening right now, and I'm really excited about this, is I'm witnessing this turn. This 2018 is the year of becoming more real, of course, vulnerability on social. And now that's going to be trendy, right? So it's like, let's make up a mess. But it's just, you can see right through it, right? So there's a detector that we all have. And it's like, nope, Not buying it. It's just we have this radar, so it's so true. So let's talk about your life. It's obviously very full. You're a mom of 3, an entrepreneur, a wife, many other things. Tell me about your time management tips, Cathy, because I know you have some.
I think the biggest thing that actually helps me is not needing to be perfect, because every once in a while I'll stop and think about how much I have to do this week. Like, my book is due for Macmillan, and I have like all of these pages that have to get written, and I have to record my podcast. And of course I have to still make sure that, I'm showing up for my licensing, company, and I have to, make sure that my kids see me and all of this stuff. So the thing I try to remind myself throughout the day is, Kath, just do the best you can frickin' do, and just leave it at that. So do as much as you can do today. And so that actually helps me, because I think that one of the biggest things that's an obstacle for people to get anything done, to write the book, to record the podcast. And so I try to remind myself throughout the day, just take little bites, sit down. You can't write the whole book today. Just write a little bit. Open up a Google Doc, just write a little bit right now. And so that method, by the end of the month, I turn around and I'm like, I got a lot done. Another thing that I do is I think it's really important to realize that the most important thing that you need in order to get any of these things done and be productive is energy. Now, I didn't know this until about 2 years ago, but I remember talking to Carrie Bentley, and she's like a productivity expert. I heard her on Amy Porterfield's podcast, and then I had her on my podcast, and then we spent some time together. And she's like, Kath, there's been all this research, and it shows that it's not about, the time management as much as the energy. If you really want to get stuff done. I said, so what does that mean? Like, drink kale juice? And she's like, no. I said, does that mean get a lot of sleep? Because I don't get sleep. I have a baby and all that. She's like, nope, you're in luck. None of that. I said, so what gives you energy? And she said, well, that's it. Every person, it's a little bit different. But she said, have you ever had the experience where you talk to someone, maybe it's someone in your family, or maybe it's a boss or someone, and you are drained. 30 minutes later, you're toast. Like, you need a nap. You're exhausted, right? She's like, that person sucks the energy out of you. I'm like, yes, I've had that experience. She's like, there's also activities that drain you of energy. Like, a lot of people don't like doing like busy work or having to call AT&T and complain about something. I'm like, yes, that drains me. Right. She said, so what are the things that make you feel so revitalized? I'm like, well, there's certain songs. She's like, great. So make a playlist and force yourself every morning. You're going to listen to 3 of those songs. And she was right. And she said, what else gives you energy? I'm like, when I actually do it and I make the time to sit down and meditate. She's like, yeah. I said, that gives me energy. She's like, so then you got to make sure it's in the schedule. And what's amazing is when I do those things, the following 2 hours after I've done any of those things, I am so productive. And so what I do is I'm aware of this, just like every human being who has an iPhone or any smartphone. We are so knowledgeable about how to keep the juice in the phone, right? Like, everyone has their systems. Like, I keep my phone charged all night. I have a charger in the car. You know what I'm talking about. Like, we keep that phone juiced up. We don't do that with ourselves. We expect that every day we should just be inspired and productive. And if we're not, there's something wrong with us. Maybe we just don't have what it takes. Why am I so negative? Why am I feeling so sluggish? That's called being on the planet. So we have to proactively prime ourselves. And so I have a short window of time every day where I have available to even get work done, because I have 3 kids. So I made up my mind. I was like, look, I decided to work for myself so that I could see my kids. So I don't want to work all day, every day. So what I decided to do was, I have a nanny. She's with the baby from like 9 to 3. But then at 3 o'clock, I go pick up the 2 older kids, the 5-year-old and 6-year-old, and I bring the baby with me. And from 3 o'clock till bedtime, I'm with those kids, which means I have half a day. So I do my morning routine and I get myself fired up. And I'm telling you, there are certain things that I know myself. I know what makes me excited and I know what drains me now. If I plug and play and I put those things in my morning, I'll listen to like a series of 3 songs. I'll take my walk. I'll write a list of, a few things. Some people, I had Julia Cameron on my show. She has a book called The Artist Way. She encourages people to do something called morning pages, where they write out anything that's on their mind. Just keep writing for 3 pages and get out anything negative, and inevitably, then it won't be there later on in the day to surprise you, because when you write things out, you sort of disempower them a little bit, because you look at it and you go, is that really true? And sometimes other things come out, like, I really want to finally get that song written or call that person. And so some people do morning pages, but whatever it is, I find that really helps me be productive. And I think at the end of the day, whenever I really go in there with someone and we look at this in their life with a microscope, why are they not getting stuff done? It's not the hours that they need more of. It's not the time management as much as they need to figure out what's going to give them that boost of energy and then capitalize on that. Because if you can do that a few times a week, you can get so much more out of yourself than if you do have the time sitting there, but now you sit down to write, or you sit down at the piano, or you walk to, have a meetup with a friend, brainstorm an idea, and you got nothing because your tank is on empty. So I think we have to remember that state of mind is something that we've got to keep that going. And just like you eat breakfast every day, you don't say, I had breakfast last Thursday. Like, why do I feel so hungry this morning? It's like, well, you have to do that every day. You got to feed your body and you got to feed your soul. You got to get yourself awake. You can do it with exercise too. Exercise is known to, change the endorphins and physiology. That's why if you start talking to people, you find out, like, Jerry Seinfeld meditates. Tony Robbins has this very in-depth morning routine. Like, this is a very common thing I find, is that people have their sort of practices where they get themselves in the zone.
Learning to push your own buttons, like you said, fire yourself up. If you can do that on your own, you're good to go, because everybody else is busy and we can't outsource that. We definitely can't outsource that. So I want to take the conversation back to a story that you shared at the top of the show, and that is when you had just had your daughter and you were approached about starting a podcast. And I think you might have said her name was Amy. It sounds like she was your guide. She really helped in getting this started for you, giving you the encouragement, but also the wisdom. I just know that so many listeners are looking for a guide, looking for a mentor to help them. How did that come about? And is she still it sounds like she is still in your life, because she's been helping you with your show. I just would love to hear more, because it's such a process, and mentorship, or coaches, whatever you want to call it, is sometimes an aloof topic.
So first of all, this woman, Amy, is the person who introduced me to this woman, Maddie. So Amy, I give her so much thanks, because if she didn't send me that email, hey, my husband just had dinner with Maddie, she's thinking about finding more podcast hosts. So I'm really grateful to Amy. And Amy, her name is Amy Loftus, and she actually wound up starting her own little podcast. And I shouldn't say little, because it's amazing. It's called Something Better. But she introduced me to this woman, Maddie, and Maddie works on my ads, does my ads for me. And she connected me with this guy named Tim, who was at our first meeting, Tim Street. And he mentored me, and he was there with me in those first several recording sessions. Not only was he there, but he gave me such clear insight. And I know that you do a lot of things where you work with people. Sometimes you'll have a workshop or a course. And many of the people that I've had on my show, Lori Harder does that. And of course, Amy Porterfield has amazing courses. And I have to tell you that I'm not just saying this because it sounds like something good to say. I mean it with every fiber of my being. The quickest, most powerful way for a person to get from point A to point B, or to point Z, is to find someone who's done that and figure out what they did. There's nothing like it. Like, if you have the opportunity to have a conversation with Jack Canfield, or you get to spend a weekend with, you want to be in the fashion business and you're going to spend some time with Jimmy Choo, you're going to learn a lot about, how to make a great shoe. And if you don't do that, you're going to be spinning your wheels, right? So it was invaluable to me, because there are so many things that I just wouldn't have necessarily known to even know about or even research. Like, Tim would say things to me like, all right, your first episode, tell people what your show's about and why you wanted to do this show and what they can expect for the next few episodes. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea for a first episode. And then he was like, and then the next thing is, think about Apple, right? Because at the end of the day, 75% of all listeners come through Apple. And I'm like, yeah, keep talking. He's like, right. So think about them. How do you solve their problems? What do they want? What do they need? What would they be excited about featuring? I'm like, well, I don't know. It's a good question. He's like, right. So do some research around that. He's like, seems like Apple really loves diversity and creativity. And Apple really loves women, right? Because there's not as many women podcasters. So, what can you do to really look at who are you serving? So I learned so much. And this is, by the way, the same thing that I've applied to every one of my businesses. When I started my online course, I took Amy's class on courses, like Courses That Convert, Amy Porterfield. She's amazing at it. I learned so much. Or also in my music life. Like I remember when I was starting out with the licensing thing, I thought, who can help me with this? And I remember I looked on the ASCAP website. ASCAP is like the songwriting, sort of like what SAG is for actors, ASCAP is for songwriters. And I saw that they had a workshop. And so I applied to be in this workshop, and they only chose 14 songwriters a year. And I thought, I might not get in. Blah, blah, blah. I wound up getting in, and I had 3 months of mentorship with some of the biggest songwriters around. And I learned so much in those 3 months. If you can figure out who might know something about what you're trying to do and get their advice, God, is that going to be so much easier than saying, no, I don't need anyone's advice. I got someone to prove. I'm just going to do this on my own. And, you're going to save yourself probably lots of time and energy by just being given a map.
Yes. And it's finding someone who's done what you want to do and asking the right questions. And what I have found, I've really been curious about this question because I get it so often. I will you mentor me, or how do I find a mentor? And when it's over the course through, LinkedIn or virtual relationship, it just doesn't, it's very difficult because you don't have that in-person connection, which is why I'm so glad that there are things like the Bumble Biz app now, where you're literally in a geographical sphere where you could meet up with someone, or, that physical presence of feeling someone's energy. Do you drain each other, or is it actually, are you creating more together?
Exactly.
And it is a personal situation that grows over time, and there has to be equal value exchange. For my mentees and mentors, I feel like we're both winning when I'm in both seats. It's not like I'm just doing someone a favor. Not at all. I get just as much. But the asking the right questions of those people, it's like bridging two of your biggest takeaways. And so good.
It's so good. And it's so generous of you. This is what people don't understand. Like, it's so generous when somebody who has a wealth of insight says, I want to share this. And the thing is, like, not everybody does, right? Like, some people have that, and then they have this scarcity mentality where they're like, I don't know, I want to keep the information to myself. And that's just bogus. But a lot of people feel that way. I look at it like there's information should be shared, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that should be out there for everyone, because I believe that there's enough room for everyone. There's enough room for everyone to have a blog and a bakery. And you and I both have podcasts. And I feel like it makes me more successful that you have a successful podcast, because the more people that love podcasts, the more they're going to find and listen to other podcasts. And that's what the research shows. If somebody listens to one show, they're more inclined to listen to several. So we should be celebrating this. And I think it's incredible that you put the information out there that you do. In fact, when you were on my podcast, I was like, this is so, so kind of her. Like, you were like, so do this, try tweeting about this, try looking at it this way. And I was like, she's really giving people, not just like, yes, it's amazing, go to Twitter. You're like, here's some things that you need to do. And not everybody does that.
Well, and likewise, it's like we learn what we need to teach, right? And I've checked a lot of boxes of dysfunction in my past, and will continue to. But if I'm not bringing that back around and helping people hopefully leapfrog my lessons, then because when we do that, we're truly accelerating the process of learning. And who doesn't really want to do that? And the process of just expansion, and it's can save us a lot of time, energy, and potentially heartaches. So a few questions to wrap us up. What's one lesson that you've had to learn over and over?
So there's several, but one thing that I just was thinking about the other day, and I have this in my own marriage. I'll sort of elaborate on how that shows up there. But the lesson, it has to do with this whole idea of like, I'm good, I'm fine. You know, when you ask people like, how you doing? And people are just like, I'm good, I'm totally fine, I'm good. And throughout my life, and my husband says this is what I do. Like if I go to a restaurant, I'll always wind up talking to the waiter and being like, what do when did you move to LA? What do you want to do? What do you really want to do? Or if I go to a dinner party, he's always like, oh, stop encouraging people to leave their job and do these other things. They're fine. He always says, everyone's fine. Everyone's fine. So I learned this lesson. I feel like that is such a lie and it's so dangerous. And I think what happens is that if you're on the planet more than a decade, which if we're listening, we've all been on the planet, thankfully, for a little while. We've all been through so much stuff. And what happens is you get your heart broken. You get disappointed. You experience a loss. And then you have this brilliant idea. You say to yourself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to want. I'm not going to need it. Because if I tell myself I'm fine, and I'm good with this. I'm good with this career. I'm good with this relationship. Whatever it is, I'm fine. I don't have to hurt. I don't have to risk going into something and getting my heart broken into a million pieces. And so when I look at people who are successful, I think to myself, they're so courageous because they were willing to want what they really want. And that takes a lot of bravery to say, I really do want this. When you watch Pretty in Pink, and you watch John Cryer, like for the first hour and 15 minutes, and he's like dying to ask Molly Ringwald out, and he can't because he's so afraid she's gonna say no, right? So then finally at the end, he's like, I'm in love with you. And even though she doesn't say like, me too, he realizes like he's okay. And they do have something incredibly special as friends, and he survives it. So I find that in my career, for some reason, I'm really brave. And I'll be like, Abe, I'll be willing to say, like, I'm going to put myself on the line. I really want this. And that takes a lot of vulnerability to put yourself out there, right? And to not be perfect at any of these things. Like, I haven't been perfect at any of these things. And I find that in my marriage, I try to tell myself, I don't care. I don't want that. I don't really need anybody. And I don't really need him. And it's a defense mechanism because my dad walked straight out the door and he never came back. And my mom fell apart. And so as a kid witnessing that, I think like this switch flipped in myself and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm never, ever, ever going to let that happen to me because I just won't want it. And I'll teach myself that I don't need it. And so I'll become super successful. So nobody ever can take away, turning off the electricity or stopping to pay the mortgage, which is what happened for us. And we had to move from we had like a middle class life. We had to move from that into like this little apartment. I had to get 2 jobs. I was like, well, that will never happen because I'll be totally self-sustaining. And it's amazing how that lesson I have to learn. I do want my marriage to be amazing. And I get he'll be like, what are you saying? Like, I'll get mad and I'll get like hurt and I'll be like, it's okay. We can just like stop, whatever. We don't even need to do this anymore. And he's like, you don't mean that. Stop saying that. It's so annoying. We've been together for 12 years and he's such a good person. He puts up with, he knows that I have this like PTSD, but people do this across the board in their life and it has to stop. I mean, for all of my, fears about it, I did put myself in the fire and thank God, we continue to like keep growing and we have 3 kids but it's a struggle and that fear, I feel that fear come up all the time. And so I want people to hear that and say to themselves, what do I really want? Maybe I'm not fine. Maybe I want more than this. Everyone deserves that.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to let yourself want it.
Absolutely. What an awesome lesson and well articulated. And that if you're feeling the Sunday blues to the extent to where it is more times than not and you're dreading Monday, something needs to be reevaluated, right? It's the Sunday blues check. I think that's the best kind of litmus test or filter of there needs to be an adjustment here. So a few rapid fire questions for you. All-time favorite book?
My favorite book is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse.
What keeps you up at night?
A couple things. I'm a workaholic. I'm addicted to my work because it makes me happy. Like some people, when they have downtime, they play Sudoku or they watch Netflix. Like, you can ask my husband. He thinks I'm the most out of touch person in the world because I've never seen Game of Thrones or the revival of Will and Grace or Modern Family that's been on for years. I don't watch any TV. I'm obsessed with my job. It makes me so happy. To me, it's like playing in a candy store. I just love it. So I do that a lot. But then I also, I just have my own neurosis where like, I'll wake up and be like, is this really everything? My kids I'll think to myself, my oldest is 6.5 and I want her to have the most incredible childhood. Should we be living in LA? Should we be moving somewhere else? Should they have a horse? Like I'm constantly sort of having these big existential questions about my life and my family life and how do we do it to the max? So those are the things that I think about at night.
That's a good spectrum for sure. And pirates or ninjas, who is tougher and why, Cathy?
I feel like ninjas are tougher because when I think of pirates, I think of, people who are just kind of like just going for it. And I think that is something that's an incredible, quality, just kind of rough and tumble. But I think that we've lost the sort of reverence for the work. And when I think of a ninja, I think of a person like Serena Williams. I think of people who commit and stay in it. They keep going. And that's what makes those micro changes that they do win those gold medals. And it's not just because they kind of like had this natural talent, like this kind of pirate to kind of just go for it. It's like they used that, but then they also stayed with it and honed the craft.
I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and how you approach this question. And you thought it through, and usually people just blurt out. So this was unique, and I love it. Okay, final question. What advice would you give to your younger self?
I would say to her, you are enough. You really are enough. Exactly as you are, with all your scars and all your broken parts and everything about you that you wish you could change. You're enough, and you're worthy. And you're worthy of being heard. And you're worthy of taking your seat at the table. And actually, everything that makes you scared or flawed or human, those are just extra things that are going to help you be relatable, and you're enough.
Amazing. That really rings a bell with me. That is my exact answer for that question, too. Wow, we've covered so much ground.
We did. Cathy. This is one of my favorite interviews ever in life.
Really?
You're so good at this.
Oh, my
goodness.
You made
such a space for people. You made me feel so seen. And
your work that you're doing, every single piece and part of it is so important. And thank you for bringing the reality of what it takes and the stories and your enthusiasm. I mean, you can really feel that you love to get up in the morning and you love what you do. And I know how that feels too. And everyone can design their own day like that. And I think it's just so valuable to hear it straight from individuals like you. So thank you for sharing, and we'll continue to watch you soar and get your book when it's out and do everything that we can to support you.
Right back at you. Thank you for being you and doing what you're doing, and thanks for this amazingly delightful conversation. It's an incredibly empowering way to start the day.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?